Okay, let's turn next to the welfare implications. What are the welfare implications of a tax? So specifically, we assume that there is a tax of 2 units that are being imposed on the supply curve. So the tax, and specifically we called it an excise tax. The excise tax is 2. So what an excise tax does is it takes the supply function, which is the regular supply function, which captures the actual cost of all the producers prior to the imposition of a tax. So, but when the tax is being added, we can shift it up by 2. So here we had our supply, and the shifted is the one with the tax. So there are 3 things now that we try to, or that I want to show you, is that there is now consumer surplus and there is a new producer surplus, but there is a third component which we also add to welfare, or total surplus. And if you remember earlier, I said total surplus is consumer surplus plus producer surplus, but what also counts towards welfare is actually the tax revenue. Okay, so what we can see is the original price was 6 and the quantity turned over was 4. But what happened as a result of the imposition of a tax, that we have now a new equilibrium price. The equilibrium price is now 7, and we have a new equilibrium quantity, which is now 3. So what we can see is that just like the price floor or the price ceiling, the imposition of the tax has reduced economic activity from 4 to 3, and the price went up from 6 to 7. So now, why is it that when the price was before 6, and then we impose a tax of 2, that the price doesn't go up to 8? Well, the reason is that at the price of 7, we lose some producers. So when there was no tax, there was a marginal producer who still could supply a small amount at the price of 6. But now that producer faces additional cost of 2, so that it will go up to 7, but there is no demand anymore for it. So because the new supply function, which is the one that actually matters, is the supply plus the tax, and because at the price of 7, only 3 are being demanded, the producers that technically had a reservation price of 5 or more, they simply don't face any demand anymore, so they leave the market. So the final marginal producer, who is now still able to operate in the market after a tax has been introduced, is the one that exactly produces at the reservation price of 5, and then we still have to add the tax of 2, and there is still a marginal consumer who is willing to pay the price of 7, but there is no consumer that could that would have a willingness to pay more than 7. So that means all the producers that originally had a reservation price of 5, they now have to exit the market. So, and therefore the new marginal producer is the one with the reservation price of 5, and he still pays this tax. Okay. So now what happens to consumer surplus? As we said, consumer surplus is everything below the demand function all the way to the price and all the way to the quantity turnover. So the new consumer surplus is this green triangle. And again, we can easily calculate that area. So this area is 4.5. 4.5. Okay, what about the new producer surplus? So producer surplus is everything which is below the price that the producers get. So even though you pay now at the cashier 7, well, 2 of that 7 go directly to the government, so the producers only get 5. And now what we need to do is, so this is the net price, so 5 is the net price. So that's the price net, that's the one that the producers get. And so now producer surplus is everything below the price of 7, the price of 5, and above the original supply function. Okay, and as we can see, this triangle is also 4.5. Okay, so now we said tax revenue is also part of welfare. And so what is the tax revenue? Well, 3 units are being turned over in the market, and each unit turned over carries the tax of 2. So the tax revenue is 2, this is the 2, times the 3. So this red area here, 2 times 3, so this is the tax revenue, and this area is 2 times 3, 6. Okay, so why is it welfare? Because that used to be part, what is now tax revenue, that used to be part of consumer surplus, at least partially, and producer surplus. But what we can also see is that there is again a deadweight loss, and the deadweight loss is the result of lost consumer surplus and producer surplus, which is associated with the reduction of economic activity from 4 to 3. So this triangle here, that used to be producer surplus and consumer surplus, but that's now lost. So that's the deadweight loss. Okay, so now we can summarize, and we can do our welfare analysis. Okay, so we have our parameters and the values. Okay, so the price, the new price with the tax is 7. The quantity, at the price of 7, quantity demanded is 3. At the price of 7, quantity supplied is also 3. And so the quantity turned over is 3. The consumer surplus, we said, is 4.5. The producer surplus is 4.5. But then there used to be, if you remember, in the market equilibrium, consumer surplus and producer surplus used to be each 8. But now, out of this 8, or out of the 16 of total consumer producer surplus, 6 are now being taken away and turned into the tax revenue. So the tax revenue is 6. Okay. So now, what is the total surplus or welfare? So that is 4.5 plus 4.5, that's 9, plus 6, that's 15. But the old, before the tax, the welfare was 16. So we must have again a deadweight loss of -1. And the deadweight loss is this black triangle here. That used to be consumer surplus and producer surplus, but that's all lost now. And you see what used to be consumer surplus and producer surplus, that is now being turned over into tax revenues, and we count it as part of welfare because it's just a redistribution of consumer surplus and producer surplus to the government, but it is still there. It is still within the society. It hasn't been lost. We typically only lose something if we have less economic activity, as we have with the price ceiling, the price floor, or a tax. Or later we will see we can also have a deadweight loss when we produce too much inefficiently. But let's go to another question. So I'll just quickly show you the slides. So here you see again the summary, what we just derived, just a different graphical illustration. But an important question is, who actually pays the tax? And we have seen that this tax revenue, which is now that purple area, which is the same as the red area here, the tax revenue is actually paid equally by consumers and producers, because this upper triangle, this upper rectangle, that used to be former consumer surplus, The lower one used to be former producer surplus, each of 3. So the tax revenue is just a redistribution of welfare from consumers and producers to the government, which is why we count it. Okay, so this is the welfare implication of a tax, and in the next video we move to the subsidy.